Imagine spending $500,000 on a brand new tractor, only to watch it literally tear itself to pieces in the middle of your field. Today, we are exposing the 10 absolute worst tractors ever built in agricultural history. These are not just minor hiccups. These are multi-million-dollar engineering disasters that drove hard-working farmers straight into bankruptcy. From engines that vibrated so violently, they snapped their own chassis in half, to a terrifying 600 horsepower, 8-wheeled Goliath that completely destroyed the soil it was built to farm. You will not believe the catastrophic monstrosity waiting at our #1 spot, so you absolutely must watch until the very end. Hit that subscribe button right now and let us dig in. Starting off our countdown at number 10 is the Zetor 5211. Coming out of the Eastern Bloc during the 1980s, this tractor was imported to the United States with a massive selling point. It was dirt cheap compared to domestic brands. However, American farmers quickly learned the hard way that you get exactly what you pay for in the agricultural equipment industry. The overall build quality was notoriously unrefined, featuring hydraulic systems that were incredibly prone to leaking right out of the factory doors. Buyers thought they were getting a great bargain, but they were actually purchasing a mechanical headache. But the absolute worst nightmare of the Zetor 5211 was the tractor's cabin. Operating this machine for a full 12-hour workday was a true test of human physical endurance. The interior ergonomics were practically non-existent, making it incredibly uncomfortable for the driver's back. Even worse, the engine vibration and the raw mechanical noise trapped inside that metal cab were absolutely deafening. Operators were essentially forced to wear heavy industrial ear protection just to preserve their hearing. The harsh rattling noise sounded exactly like you were trapped inside a metal trash can rolling down a very rocky hill. Financially, the initial purchase savings evaporated the moment the tractor required specialized replacement parts that were incredibly hard to source in the States. Losing crucial days of planting season while waiting for an Eastern European hydraulic pump could easily cost a medium-sized farm tens of thousands of dollars in lost crop yield. Did anyone watching actually learn to drive on one of these loud machines? Let me know. The silver lining here is that this failure forced domestic manufacturers to heavily prioritize premium cab designs. Now wait until you see the British disaster waiting at number 9. At number 9, we have the infamous Nuffield 345. British engineering has certainly produced some legendary agricultural machines, but this late 1960s model was definitely not one of them. The 345 was powered by a 2.8-liter, 3-cylinder diesel engine that possessed a fatal design flaw, a complete lack of proper harmonic balancers. Because the engine was unbalanced, it created violent shaking throughout the entire machine. This was not just a little rattle. The engine vibrated so aggressively under a heavy load that it became a danger to its own structural integrity. These violent vibrations would literally shake nuts, bolts, and crucial components right off the tractor's frame while the farmer was driving. Fuel lines would snap unexpectedly in the field, heavy sheet metal would crack under the constant stress, and the cooling system constantly struggled to keep up with the poorly designed block, leading to serious overheating issues. Farmers had to constantly walk behind their tractors to pick up parts that had simply fallen off into the dirt. It was a mechanical nightmare that required daily structural welding just to keep the tractor in one piece during harvest. The financial pain of owning a Nuffield 345 was devastating for loyal customers. Farmers found themselves constantly paying mechanics to replace engine mounts and rebuild cracked frames. The ongoing repair bills quickly outpaced the actual value of the entire tractor. It was a massive money pit that severely damaged the Nuffield brand's reputation, contributing heavily to its eventual absorption. However, this catastrophic failure taught diesel engineers worldwide the absolute necessity of using internal balancing shafts. Vibrations are a nightmare, but what happens when a legendary American brand releases a deeply flawed transmission? Let us look at number 8. Coming in at number 8 is the early 1964 to 1968 Ford 5000, specifically the pre-force models equipped with the disastrous Select-O-Speed transmission. The Ford 5000 nameplate eventually became a respected farming legend, but its early years were a complete and total catastrophe. Ford aggressively pushed the Select O-Speed transmission to market to win the horsepower race. It was meant to be a revolutionary full power shift transmission. Instead, farmers quickly and bitterly nicknamed it the Jerk O-Speed. It was an overly complex system of hydraulic bands and planetary gears that completely confused traditional tractor mechanics. If the internal transmission bands were not perfectly adjusted by a master mechanic, the results were violent. The transmission slipped constantly under load, jumped out of gear on hills, or aggressively slammed into the next gear without warning. This caused severe operator whiplash and sometimes completely destroyed attached power takeoff implements. You could not safely coast downhill, and towing it to start the engine was impossible. It turned everyday farming tasks into a dangerous rodeo ride, leaving operators frustrated, physically sore, and terrified of what expensive noise the gearbox would make next. The financial blowback was monumental for American farm families. Rebuilding a Select O-Speed required highly specialized technicians and extremely costly parts. Adjusted for inflation, frustrated farmers were essentially throwing over $40,000 into a machine that could not reliably pull a plow. Have you or your dad ever had the extreme misfortune of trying to fix a Jerk O-Speed? Tell me your story below. The silver lining is that this disaster led directly to the perfectly re-engineered Force models of 1968. A bad transmission is awful, but number 7 had an engine that destroyed its own drivetrain. At number 7 is the Minneapolis Moline G900. Built in the late 1960s, the G900 was designed as a massive, heavy-duty row crop tractor, packing a huge 504 cubic inch engine. But it possessed a fatal engineering flaw. It generated far too much raw engine torque for its own good. During this era, manufacturers were locked in a desperate horsepower war, simply dropping massively powerful engines into older tractor chassis designs that had absolutely not been upgraded to handle that level of twisting force. When farmers put the G900 under a heavy draft load in deep soil, the immense twist of the large engine would frequently overpower the driveline. The sheer force would shatter the clutch plates, violently snap the power takeoff shafts, or absolutely destroy the rear-end differential gears. It was like putting the engine of a muscle car into a golf cart. You could literally hear the sickening sound of snapping metal from across the field when the tractor finally gave up. It was a brutal display of mismatched engineering that ruined harvest schedules. Financially, this was an absolute heartbreaker. Loyal farmers invested top dollar into these powerhouses, only to face massive repair bills. Replacing an entire rear-end assembly could easily bankrupt a small operation during those tight economic times. This era of overpowered and underbuilt drivetrains rapidly accelerated the demise of the entire Minneapolis Moline brand. The legacy of the G900 served as a grim warning to the industry. You must massively reinforce transmissions to match engine displacement. If you think that was a bad mechanical combination, wait until you see the articulated monster at number 6. Number 6 brings us to the Massey Ferguson 1500. In the 1970s, the race to build massive, articulated four-wheel drive tractors was officially on in America. Massey Ferguson wanted to dominate the large acreage market, so they made a bold move. They took a monstrous, heavy-duty Caterpillar V8 engine and dropped it right into the 1500 model. On paper and in sales brochures, it sounded like the ultimate dream machine, delivering raw, unbeatable American V8 power. Farmers imagined effortlessly pulling the largest plows available at record speeds across their vast fields. In harsh reality, it was a drivetrain disaster of epic proportions. The transmission, drive axles, and drop boxes designed by Massey Ferguson were simply not engineered to handle the massive, instant torque output of that industrial Caterpillar engine. When the tires finally found traction in heavy dirt, the engine did not stall. Instead, the tractor would literally tear its own internal driveline to shreds. Gear teeth would shear off, and axles would snap under the immense pressure. It was a tractor fighting a war against itself, and the transmission always lost the battle. The financial pain for farmers was astronomical. Imagine taking out a loan equivalent to well over $150,000 today for a top-of-the-line four-wheel drive behemoth, only to have the transmission explode in a muddy field. The downtime, expensive towing fees, and rebuild costs forced severe financial hardships on large-scale operators. But this expensive failure taught the entire agricultural manufacturing sector the critical importance of exact torque matching. Speaking of massive four-wheel drive experiments, even the legendary Green Giant makes terrible mistakes. Let us check out John Deere's rarest failure at number 5. Breaking into the top 5 is the John Deere 8020. Yes, even the mighty John Deere brand has very expensive skeletons in its corporate closet. Built back in 1960, the 8020 was John Deere's very first attempt at an articulated four-wheel drive tractor. Powered by a Detroit diesel 6-71 engine, it produced 215 horsepower, which was absolutely massive for that era. So why is it considered a monumental failure? Because it was absurdly heavy, completely impractical for general farming, and ridiculously expensive for the average consumer. Tipping the scales at a staggering 20,000 pounds, it lacked the basic maneuverability needed for standard row crop farming. It compressed the soil heavily wherever it drove. Furthermore, it cost nearly $30,000 in 1960. If we adjust that for inflation, that is the equivalent of spending over $300,000 today. The tractor simply could not utilize standard implements of the time, meaning buyers had to purchase custom-made, extremely expensive plows just to make use of the machine. The fuel consumption was also atrocious, burning expensive diesel just to move its massive weight. The project was a massive commercial black hole for John Deere. The tractors were so expensive and poorly suited for general use that Deere only ever managed to build exactly 100 units before pulling the plug completely. Have you ever seen one of these 100 rare green beasts in person? Drop a comment. The silver lining was monumental, though. John Deere took the humiliating financial lessons learned from the 8020 and eventually perfected the articulated market. John Deere failed with size, but number 4 failed because of a terrifying electronic system. At number 4 sits the Case Denwari H4994. During the 1980s, KCH desperately wanted to build the undisputed king of the agricultural field. They introduced this massive machine boasting a monstrous 400 horsepower turbocharged Scania V8 engine. Mechanically speaking, the engine was an absolute beast, but the tractor itself possessed a fragile glass jaw. The biggest issue was the incredibly complex power shift transmission, which was unfortunately coupled with some of the most unreliable early electronics ever seen in agriculture. The primitive wiring harnesses simply could not handle the harsh, dusty realities of daily field conditions. Electronic sensors would fail entirely at random, creating terrifying situations for operators. The tractor would frequently and dangerously throw itself into neutral gear while pulling full, heavy loads uphill due to these electronic glitches. The financial devastation caused by the 4994 was truly legendary in farming communities. Purchasing this flagship tractor was akin to spending well over $250,000 in today's money, only to end up with a giant red paperweight parked in the barn. Dealership mechanics absolutely hated working on them because diagnosing the electronic gremlins took days of extremely expensive, frustrating manual labor. This unreliable machine was a massive financial hit to farmers who were already struggling to survive during the terrible 1980s farming crisis. Families lost their livelihoods trying to keep these machines running. However, the incredibly dark legacy of the 4994 forced Case Denwari to completely rethink and redesign their entire electrical architecture from the ground up. This painful and expensive stepping stone eventually led to the highly robust electronic systems used in modern tractors today. If you think those electronics were bad, the farm crisis also brought us number 3, a tractor whose technology terrified an entire generation. Number 3 on our countdown is the International Harvester 5488. Now let us be perfectly fair. Mechanically speaking, the 5488 was a brilliantly designed piece of machinery, but it became a tragic victim of terrible timing and overly ambitious, terrifying early technology. It featured a highly advanced, early computerized monitoring system known as the data center. To a traditional farmer in the early 1980s, who was entirely used to simple mechanical analog gauges, This flashing digital screen was completely alien and highly intimidating. The transition from simple mechanics to complex computers was simply too sudden for the market. Making matters significantly worse, the primitive electronic sensors were highly sensitive to standard field dust and tractor vibration. The digital screens would constantly glitch and continuously flash false, catastrophic engine warnings. This caused immense panic and completely halted critical fieldwork for non-existent mechanical problems. The financial timing for this expensive learning curve could not possibly have been worse. American farmers were already dealing with 20% interest rates and plunging global crop prices. Taking a massive financial risk on a technologically intimidating tractor that frequently required specialized electronic diagnostics was simply too much for the struggling agricultural industry to bear. To make the situation even more dire, International Harvester was actively going bankrupt during the release of this series. The massive warranty replacement costs and severe market hesitation directly contributed to the company's ultimate collapse and subsequent sale to Tenneco. Yet the 5488's historical legacy is absolutely undeniable in the modern world. It was a brilliant, forward-thinking machine born at the worst possible time, single-handedly pioneering the concept of the smart cab that every single modern tractor relies on today. Being decades ahead of your time is a curse, just like our runner-up waiting patiently at number 2. Just missing the top spot at number 2 is the Massey Ferguson 3690. Released to the public in the early 1990s, this high-tech tractor promised the absolute future of farming with its computerized Dynashift transmission and advanced Datatronic monitoring system. But the promised future, it quickly turned out, was full of fatal digital error codes. The 3690 became highly notorious across the industry for its devastating electronic gremlins. The early Datatronic computer system would frequently and unexpectedly crash under the heavy vibration of daily field work, instantly freezing the transmission in whatever gear it happened to be in. Frustrated farmers would be roading the tractor down the highway at top transport speed, only to have the main computer completely fail and abruptly lock the transmission without any warning whatsoever. The resulting repair bills from the dealership were absolutely staggering and deeply infuriating. Because every single component was securely tied into a proprietary, closed computer network, farmers could no longer fix their own tractors with a simple wrench in the barn. They desperately needed a specialized dealership technician equipped with a proprietary diagnostic laptop, who was actively charging premium hourly rates just to plug into the machine's mainframe. A simple $50 electronic sensor failure could easily end up costing thousands of dollars in mandatory computer diagnostics and horribly expensive lost harvesting time. Has anyone watching this video ever been completely locked out of their own tractor by a simple computer glitch? It is a modern mechanical nightmare. The brutal financial lessons learned from the failure of the 3690 forced the entire agricultural industry to adopt standardized, heavy-duty shielded electronics capable of actually surviving real farm work. But absolutely none of these previous disasters can even compare to the unbelievable monstrosity waiting at our number 1 spot. Taking the undisputed crown at number 1 as the absolute worst tractor in agricultural history is the versatile 1080, famously known around the world as Big Roy. Custom built back in 1977, this was a mind-boggling 600 horsepower, 30-ton Leviathan. It was proudly powered by a massive Cummins KTA 1150 inline-6 diesel engine. The machine uniquely featured 4 distinct axles and 8 massive agricultural tires. The initial engineering idea was to create the ultimate unstoppable pulling machine for massive farms, but it became a total, unmitigated disaster from the very first day of testing. Because the unbelievably massive engine was mounted directly behind the central cab, the driver was rendered completely blind to whatever heavy implement they were attempting to pull behind them. Furthermore, the rear-mounted cooling radiators constantly sucked up massive amounts of field dust, causing the engine to suffer from constant, severe overheating issues. But the absolutely fatal flaw was its core steering design. Big Roy articulated directly in the middle, But because it was so incredibly long and heavy with 4 axles, making any kind of standard turn caused the 8 massive tires to violently scrub against the earth. It literally compacted the topsoil into concrete, completely destroying the very agricultural field it was supposed to be preparing for planting. Financially speaking, it was a multi-million-dollar corporate prototype project that produced a machine so completely unusable, not a single unit was ever sold to the general public. However, Big Roy's historical legacy remains incredibly profound today. This massive failure conclusively proved you cannot just keep adding wheels to solve traction problems, directly paving the way for the massive rubber track systems we see today. And that concludes our list of the worst agricultural tractors ever built. There you have it, the 10 worst tractors that proved massive engineering budgets do not always guarantee success. From catastrophic engine vibrations to an 8-wheeled monster that destroyed fields, these agricultural machines caused severe financial headaches. However, their painful failures ultimately shaped the highly reliable modern tractors we use today. Which of these mechanical disasters do you think was the absolute worst? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this farming history, please subscribe, like this video, and ring the bell to catch our next episode.